How's it going, everyone? My name is Maximilian, and you're watching episode 36 of Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3, The Online Warrior. What's up, folks? Thank you very much for tuning in to another episode of Ultimate Marvel 3, The Online Warrior, an ongoing web series where we feature online ranked games, showing a bunch of different competition and members of the community playing Ultimate Marvel 3, as well as myself. But the biggest topic at hand right now is that the biggest tournament for Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3 and the biggest worldwide tournament has recently concluded over last week, and that was EVO 2012. Now, there was a lot of concerns about EVO 2012. For you guys that might not have had the chance, you can check out the full results up at shoryuken.com, eventhubs.com, or iplaywinner.com to see exactly who took what spot in top 8 and top 16. But more notably, Ultimate Marvel 3 was going into this tournament with a really big amount of concern to a lot of players. Most notably because there was recently infinites found in the game, this infinite as a result of the TAC exchange bug, and you're able to consistently get into an infinite combo based off jumping off of the ground. We talked about this a little while back, and we were kind of curious of how much it was going to affect the game, and surprisingly, it did not affect the game very much in terms of the EVO turnout and the EVO span of events. I think only one time during EVO was someone able to pull it off. Now, the challenge with this infinite, and the reason you didn't see it show up very much, was because it's not easy. It's not easy to pull off at all, and it'll take a lot of muscle memory and essentially months of practice before people get the hang of it. However, depending on certain characters and the ease of usability, depending on which side they team aerial combo, their direction, I think that's going to be pretty significant down the line, and it is a touch of death for almost everyone in the cast if you're able to pull it off. Now, talking about the rest of EVO, I actually had my top EVO picks to get the best ranking at the end of the EVO tournament in the last episode of The Online Warrior, and a few of them ended up being fairly close. A lot of the guys that I were mentioning did end up making top 8. The biggest thing I was concerned about was the impact of the Japanese players that would be coming to EVO and their technology and the stuff they've been figuring out. But believe it or not, the Japanese actually had a pretty tough time at EVO, and it looked to be that this was a very American-dominated type of game, as well as it's always mostly has been. So I think the only one that was able to make it the furthest was Cho, and Cho was arguably the best Japanese competitor at the show. He's one of those players that uses he uses good characters because he wants to win, but I've seen him use Strider on point in some situations, and it is some inspiring stuff. He would use like Strider, Virgil, and Magneto. Some extremely impressive play. The guy is amazing at the game, and like I was saying, is arguably the best Marvel player. There are some other guys like Abijin that were there, and believe it or not, Abijin did not even make it out of his pools. And that was the thing about EVO, is that even getting out of your pools is a big challenge in itself. Sadly, I didn't get the chance to compete because I had a lot of work I had to do that weekend at EVO, covering events for other channels, doing interviews, and getting ready for the panel I had on Saturday. So sadly, I wasn't able to compete, and it was a total bummer. But from what I hear, it was a lot of blow-ups. It was a lot of excitement, and it was essentially one of the most hyped EVO, or one of the most hyped tournaments yet for Ultimate Marvel 3. And because this was the biggest one, people were really curious. One of the most exciting things was that players from other nations came in and ended up making it into top 8 that were outside of what we thought was going to happen. Like, there was the Mexican player, I think his name was T.A. Fruitsy, that went in with MODOK and his MODOK, Taskmaster, and Captain America team. Whenever MODOK went down, which was his main character, he did an excellent job with Taskmaster and Cap on the back end. But his tactic for MODOK was essentially a very patient game of sitting at the top of the screen, taking advantage of the areas that a lot of characters have difficulty getting to, ones like Morrigan, ones like Doom, ones like Wesker, and it was a game plan that he stuck to the whole time, and it worked really well. Some of the footage of him taking out some top players, including like Marlin Pie, very early on in pools, I believe, have recently gone up online as well. So if you search that title, like Marlin Pie versus T.A. Fruitsy, you'll be able to find those matches. It just shows to show you that people sleep on some of these characters, and characters like MODOK Man end up being really good in the long run because of his extended and abnormal mobility compared to the rest of the cast. So the only thing that was an issue with his team was that in a lot of the situations where he had to kill characters, when he was using MODOK, he wasn't able to do enough damage. And that's a big thing when it comes to the top finals of Marvel, is that Most of the time, the character and the team composition is designed a way to one-touch kill almost everyone. Now, we all know this is the thing in Marvel, and this is the thing that's very necessary for a lot of characters, and what makes characters like Virgil and Zero so devastating in a game like this. But especially when it comes to team synergy and how your DHC setups are, and especially how you use your meter, you really need to use your meter in a way to kill the character fast and hard, at least with a DHC or two. And that's what TA Fruitsy was kind of missing. He was able to take out a lot of the characters that have had under like 900,000 to 800,000 health, but in those other situations, it was just too much, and he would have to end his combo and go for a mix-up. And in a game like Marvel with really high-level competition, going for the mix-up can be pretty dangerous, which is why a lot of the folks don't want to go for that TAC Infinite, because you put yourself at risk for doing something that could potentially kill them, or, you know, get you as much damage as possible, or sacrificing that damage for the hope to kill. That's the metagame with infinites in this game, which I kind of like. I think if infinites are here to stay, it's good that you have to make a choice, that they're not easily executable, and they're difficult to pull off, and you actually have to make that choice between going up, down, left, or right. So it's a good thing. I think that's actually a good thing of how it's going to affect Marvel in the long run, even though TACs are ridiculously overpowered, and a lot of the times are well worth the amount of effort, and not being, you know, the punishment for it is very little. In fact, it's almost nothing. The punishment you get is that you don't get to finish your combo. So who knows, man. The other bit of news I wanted to talk about was the finals, minus Fruitsy's really dominating performance with MODOK. He wasn't able to get very far into top 8, but he did get to top 8. And the guy that I predicted that would most likely take it, even though Justin Wong I had as a really high likely factor, I was mentioning earlier from the Curly Mustache stream that I wanted Yipes to make it. Sadly, he didn't make it into top 8, but he did amazingly well. And Filipino Champ ended up taking Ultimate Marvel 3, and he absolutely deserved it. A lot of folks might not like Filipino Champ, and even I might disagree with some of his sportsmanship as far as the competitive scene goes with games like Competitive Fighters, but he showed his all. He didn't use Phoenix in the finals very much, and he essentially used his Dormammu team that was extremely dominant. Essentially, his Dormammu reminds me of Blackheart from Marvel 2, which is some very difficult stuff to pull off because there's a lot more execution involved. There's some really impressive things, like him hiding all of his spell casting and stuff like that. You don't even realize that he's already cooked up two reds and one blue, as Dormammu players would say. So it was some very cool stuff. The finals were very intense. Infrit made it very far, and Infrit was one of those guys that I think absolutely deserved it, because the dude would be consistently making top 8 in WNF. He'd be consistently making like top 3 almost all the time, and you just see him if you're watching Wednesday Night Fights, and from what I hear from a lot of the folks that are at Wednesday Night Fights all the time, he's there all the time. So the amount of dedication that guy was putting in, Infrit absolutely deserves it, and good job, dude. Good job to Filipino Champ, and a very good job to all the competitors of Marvel. In my opinion, it was the absolute biggest, most hype thing of the show. So moving into the next topic of discussion for this episode, since more stuff happened at EVO, is the panel that happened for Capcom. The first thing they were going over was some news for Street Fighter Cross Tekken, but the stuff that had us really excited was the panel they were going to be holding with Nitsuma for Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3. Now, we didn't know what was going to be the details of this panel, and there was this big rumor that was going on ahead of time that was spread around the internet about Uncanny Ultimate Marvel 3, or the uncanny version of Marvel vs. Capcom 3. Essentially, more characters, more balance adjustments, kind of a revised version of the game. So everyone went in really excited to hear this happen, and the first thing they do at the Capcom panel for UMVC3 is tell us that we have no announcements for you guys at all. Nothing new is going to be here at this panel, which was kind of a bummer. They essentially went forward and were explaining their design decisions, or their decisions for methods of updating the game, and they were saying how the TAC Infinite how it exists and how they want to address it. And their response is that they don't want to address it. They think it actually adds to the metagame and adds to the overall experience of Ultimate Marvel 3, and that is staying. There's been some other stuff that's been discovered since EVO, which I'll talk about a little bit after this. But what happened later in the panel was that they essentially came to the conclusion that they want to keep Marvel the way it is. That UMVC3 is not going to be receiving any balance patches, and the game is going to keep the way it is. Now, of course, I'm disappointed about this. I wanted there to be more, as much as I would like them to, add more to Marvel 3, because it is the most popular fighting game out there right now. I don't know if anyone else can disagree with me. Is there any other individual fighting game that is more popular and more played than UMVC3? I would say maybe Street Fighter 4, but at the same time, UMVC3 is so big. It was the main event of the entire EVO show, right next to King of Fighters. And hearing Capcom say that they're not going to update the game and they're done with it is a little disappointing. I kind of find that to be a huge bummer for myself as a fighting game fan, as a huge, you know, person that loves the Versus series. Who knows? But the other thing they went on to mention was that the big reason behind this is the fact that Capcom's changed a lot in the past few months, and with different titles coming out, that the majority of the team that worked on Ultimate is working on other titles, some unannounced titles, and other titles like Resident Evil 6. So that's the big problem, is that all the people that actually worked on UMVC3 are no longer working on fighting games, or are working on things that we don't know about. The other challenge was that making more characters and making more adjustments to a game like Ultimate is difficult, because it is a game that is not only solely owned by Capcom, it's owned by Capcom and a huge movie studio by the name of Marvel. And the big issue is that getting the license rights for certain characters, getting the ability to make even more games, involves a lot more work with like making contracts and doing all this other stuff that I guess Capcom just isn't ready to do anymore. I think that's the big problem, is that Marvel vs. Capcom is a game in a Versus series, right? But it's a Versus series that's now owned by a huge company that is not the easiest to work with, because a lot of these characters are franchises. They have properties and rights that are beyond the scale of which they used to be. Which made me think, and I didn't get the chance to ask Nitsuma this question, and I really wish I got up on the stage earlier of the panel and asked him, but my biggest thing is that for me personally, and let me know if you guys agree with this. My biggest thing with the Versus series, especially the Marvel vs. Capcom series, since it has so much of a history of like Marvel superheroes, X-Men Children of the Atom, you know, X-Men vs. Street Fighter, that Marvel characters and Capcom characters now seem to fit alongside each other just fine and very well. Even a lot of the cast in UMVC3 and the original Marvel 3 I didn't like very much. The cast of characters kind of bummed me out a lot of the time, because I didn't know who a lot of these Marvel characters were, and some of the newer Capcom characters kind of bugged me slightly as well, and I think the cast of the older games is a lot better. But nonetheless, it grows on you. It's the same thing with Marvel 2, where a lot of the characters bugged me sometimes. It grew on me a lot, and now the cast of UMVC3 totally makes sense, and all these characters just feel right at home, which happens with time. Eventually you listen to the same song over and over again, and no matter how annoying or how much you dislike it at first, it eventually might find a catchy beat in your head. So that's the thing that's kind of happened with Marvel now. But what I've kind of suggested at the end of EVO, and what I wanted to suggest was, and here's what I wanted to get your guys' opinion, I would like Capcom to stray away from the Versus series and getting other franchises involved. We've now seen issues with them working with Tatsunoko, and the big problem with them of bringing that game over to the States, and Seth Killian essentially working his butt off on Capcom, making that a possibility, and it not doing very well in the States because we don't know a lot about the characters was the big problem. And now Marvel has this thing where, you know, they're a movie studio. They have a lot of say on what characters they're going to put into the game that belong to them. So it becomes very, very challenging for Capcom to try to keep making games off of this design decision. And they keep going over to other, you know, franchises to fight against as well, like Street Fighter Cross Tekken, although that one did not turn out very well. What I want Capcom to do, and what I wish would happen as a result of all this and learning that UMVC3 is done now, they're not going to update anymore, there's no DLC characters, there's no more characters at all. If something else were to happen, it would be like a Marvel vs. Capcom 4. The UMVC3 team has moved on. I want Capcom to move on as well from making games against other companies like Tatsunoko, Namco, stuff like that. I want a proper Capcom All-Stars game. Now, before you guys are already responding, I can hear you typing already. You're going to tell me, Max, they already did that. That was called Capcom Fighting Jam, and it came out back in like 2004, 2005. Yes, I am completely aware of Fighting Jam. And you also need to understand, Fighting Jam was not a very good game. It essentially came out with a lot of critical press, and it did not suit well to a lot of the players that were playing games like Capcom vs. SNK 2, Alpha 3, Third Strike, Marvel 2. There was no reason to go to Fighting Jam at the time, because Fighting Jam took a lot of the system mechanics of previous games. Essentially, Fighting Jam was kind of like Capcom vs. SNK2, with a very similar look because it reused the same sprites as CVS2, but it limited your options as far as what you can do with your characters. Now, granted, we all know CVS2 is a hugely tier-dominated game, and there's some very powerful grooves, but what happened in Fighting Jam is that they limited how you could even use some characters. Like, the Third Strike characters had to use the P groove, from what I understand, and there were things like that, which made it very limiting, and which is why people didn't like it. I found a little bit of fun with it. I found it kind of cool that there was some other CPS3 characters. I forget the name. I think it was like Red Sun, or it was essentially the guy with the ninja guy, the guy with the giant lion head. I always forget the name of this game, but it was a very cool game, and it was a proper Capcom All-Stars game at the time. Even though it didn't have characters like Mega Man, you know, it didn't have a huge variety of characters from a lot of other games as well. It was kind of just a mishmash of all the existing sprites that they had, and they threw them into one game once again, which was kind of disappointing. I think the only original sprite in that game might have been Ingrid. Oh, Red Earth is the name of the game, and I think the Red Earth sprites were all reused from the original Red Earth game. So here's the thing, is that I don't think there has been a proper Capcom All-Stars game. And I think going with the Versus series to a bunch of other avenues and other companies has put them into a situation where it becomes difficult to work with. I want a proper Capcom All-Stars game. I want a fighting game that isn't, you know, that isn't anything crazy like Power Stone or as much other 3D fighters. I want it to be a proper 2D Capcom All-Stars game, whether it's Street Fighter versus Capcom, Capcom versus Street Fighter. Nonetheless, I want you to take the Capcom franchise of history and the past like 15 years and put them into a game. Like characters, like really old characters from Capcom lore, you know, as much stuff as they have the rights to. I think that would be an awesome game, and the system mechanics could be totally different. You can use anything you want. There would be any issues with licenses and stuff like that. And I think that's what it is a big reason Street Fighter 4 was successful, is that Capcom had a lot of free reign with that game, because it was all up to them. Like, they could choose the characters they wanted to use, they can choose all that stuff. So it's just my opinion. I'd like to see a proper Versus game, but keep it in the same universe. Like, keep it all Capcom characters, because there's so many to choose from that it would be totally awesome if we got Dante versus Mega Man, if we got, you know, Beautiful Joe versus who knows. Like, we could take all the characters from Marvel 3 and add a ton more from classic Capcom fashion. So let me know what you guys think in the comments. Let me know if you think that might be a good idea. I would love to see that game personally. This is all my opinion, and it isn't based off speculation or facts or anything. It's just what I would like to see happen based off the information we were given during the UMVC3 panel at EVO. So thank you guys very much for watching the video. In the next episode, we're going to go into a couple of the glitches that were quickly discovered right after UMVC3 got concluded at EVO, and even during, which was, I think, the Kutoba glitch, and the other one is the current, I think it's the capture bug, where if you get into a capture state, certain things changing for damage rates and the amount of damage you do. So stay tuned for the next episode, and if you enjoyed this one, please leave a thumbs up. I will greatly appreciate it. As always, my name is Maximilian, and I'll see you next time.